So today we are going to talk about Portugal. And Portugal actually was just named by Condé Nast Traveler, the magazine. They have the Reader's Choice Awards every year. So readers will vote on their top hotels, top destinations, top countries. So 800,000 votes were in. And actually, Portugal was the number one country on the list. So that's really great timing for us to have this class. And I'm very excited to be here and share with you some of my favorite parts of Portugal, both the culture, the tradition, as well as the cities. So rather than just go through city by city, we're going to do it a little bit different today. And we're going to start by talking about the festivals, because I think I'm of the opinion that if you really want to get to know a culture, you've got to learn about their festivals, because then, what you learn what's important to them, what's exciting for them, what are some of the traditions that they've kept on for, and sometimes for generations and centuries, right? Then we're going to talk about the food. The food is very, very important, especially in some cultures, and in, Portugal is one of those, where, food is where it's not just what you eat, but it's about, sitting down with your friends, with your family, and that sense of community and camaraderie that comes out of the meal. So we're going to look through the most typical Portuguese um, meals, and then we're going to look at the wines, of course, because we all can learn always about wonderful wines, and Portugal actually has tremendously good wines. And then we're going to move on to seeing the cities, and we're actually going to cover the whole country, including the islands. Portugal is a very beautiful, and it's actually a very affordable destination compared to, say, like Spain, France, Italy. Portugal is much more affordable, and there's a lot to see. And I feel that when you travel around the towns in Portugal, you feel like transported onto another era. We have a picture here on this first slide of Porto, and you see the Barcos Moliceiros. There's boats there. You see how colorful and vibrant, the city landscape is. So it's very unique in its architecture, I think, and it stands out. It's very, very different than the neighbor in Spain, for example. And also its traditions and the food are very, very different. Um, tell you a little bit about me. So I was born and raised in Seville, Spain. So I spent, many um, summers vacationing in Portugal, and obviously throughout my entrepreneurship career, I do you lots of business with Portugal, and I have employees in Portugal. So I've what I consider good knowledge of the country, and I'm going to try to show you, share some of that knowledge with you, and give you some of the tidbits of what, really is like for the locals, versus the touristy things, right? So let me start with the map of Portugal, or two maps. So you see that Portugal is divided to the northern Portugal part on the map on the right, and that's where Porto would be. Then you got the central. And we seeing, cities along all of this areas. Lisbon here on the tip of the nose. Then the Alentejo, which is what was in that background picture, and then at the bottom, the Algarve. And then, of course, we can't forget the Azores and Madeira, which are not here in reality, but we'll see a map of them later. So I was born and raised right about here in Seville, Spain. Actually, not right on the river. Never mind. So right here is where Seville, Spain is. So the Algarve, for example, and Lisbon are very close to me my whole life, until I moved here to the States. So then, you got Lisbon over here, Porto's over here. We're going to talk about Aveiro, which is here, the Douro Valley, which is over here. Um, and then the, Alentejo, and then the Algarve. Alrighty. So I would like to start with the festivals, like I said. It's a great way to understand a culture and what is it that they celebrate, why do they celebrate it, why is it important to them. The first festival, it would be no surprise to you, and this is, I have little maps over here so you can see where you actually would go to really see the best of this festival. So Carnival, no surprise, right? So being Portugal being the original or the colonizing world of Brazil later on, in the 15th and 16th centuries. So Carnival is very important to the Portuguese. Now, the Carnival in Rio is obviously, much larger than the ones that you see in Portugal, but this is where the roots start, and you would definitely, get a taste of how it all got started. So we got a couple of towns that I'm going to mention. One is down on the Algarve, and then one is over here, almost in Porto. So not as famous as Rio's Carnival. Carnival is still a part of Portuguese blood. So as you know, this happens in February, and wherever you are during Carnival, you're bound to get caught up with festivities, with floats and dancers and people in masks and fancy dresses parading through towns across all of Portugal. The word carnival comes from the Portuguese word carnavale, which means to put away the meat. Because back in the 13th century, when Catholics started not eating meat for Lent, so they created this festival the day before Ash Wednesday, or which is called Fat Tuesday, where they would sort of, you know, eat all they could so that they could then go, fasting throughout Lent. So this has evolved into a blowout party, which is now a public holiday. Um, and again, it takes place in February and March. The biggest carnivals take place in Lule. This is the one in the bottom near Faro, and then the town of Obar, which is this one south of Porto. They both transform into like a giant street party with samba music, costume competitions, and street food. Next festival that I'd like to talk about is Holy Week. Um, Portugal is a deeply rooted Catholic country, so they celebrate Holy Week, which is the days before Easter Sunday. And they particularly do it in the north of Portugal, right around, this is a town called Braga, right in the north. So they have loudspeakers throughout the streets that will play Gregorian chants, and then they'll reenact biblical scenes throughout the streets and the churches. The churches that are decorated with banners, flowers, candles. To represent the Via Crucis, the locations where Jesus carried the cross before he was crucified. So here in this picture, you see some Roman soldiers, you see Virgin Mary and Jesus with his cross. At night, donkeys and locals wearing black hoods and lead processions through the streets, followed by the people walking barefoot and carrying fairy lights, candles, and torches. It's quite something really cool to see. Now we're going to move to something a little bit different. So this is the International Sand Sculpture Festival. This happens also in the Algarve, right here by Lagos. This festival takes place between the towns of Portes and Lagoa in the Algarve, way west, from May to December. So it's ongoing. So around 60 artists come and create sculptures entirely from sand, some of which are as long as a bus. The festival is the largest of its kind in the world. Like there are other sand sculpture festivals. I believe there's one in San Diego, but this is the largest in the world. And each year it's got a different theme. So some like music or idols, the animal kingdom, living world. These are some of the themes that have been in the past few years. Discoveries, Hollywood films, characters, so on and so forth. So this massive event features 65,000 tons of sand that is transformed into dozens of giant sand sculptures that can rise up to 35 feet. The exhibition is open during the day. As you can see, you can walk through the statues or the sculptures, and and especially popular at night also because they use like dramatic lighting techniques to light up the different sculptures. The main challenge for the artists is the rain and the wind, which could ruin their work. But the Algarve region, there's not much rain during the summer, and the sand is actually particularly sticky in this area, so it makes it a perfect place for a sand sculpture festival. Here is another type of festival in of battle. This is the Battle of Flowers. Some from it, which is also, if you see right here on the northwest. So from late April to early May, it's the Festa das Cruces in Barcelos. This is the town is called Barcelos, and opens the season for a type of fair that mixes the religious and the secular. This particular festival began in the early 16th century, and until the 19th century, it was especially religious in nature, welcoming hundreds of pilgrims, not only from Barcelos, but from all over the country. And Galicia, which is part of Spain, is the part of Spain that sits on top of Portugal. But later in the 20th century, they added like carousels and fireworks and processions and were added to the mix. They have live music and with drumming bands, and then they do pedal carpets and a procession. And the most um, typical thing or thing that will catch your attention is this Battle of Flowers. This is probably the most famous part of the fair, where people in cars from 30 different associations in Barcelos region, they throw flowers at the spectators. So it's pretty fun. And as you can see, they all dress up. You're going to see through the different slides that the Portuguese love dressing up, like you can see here. This is the Festa dos Santos Populares. Here, the locals celebrate saints at festivals throughout June, and it's a different saint in each town. But for example, in Lisbon is Saint Anthony, the 12th to the 13th of June. Saint John in Porto in the 23rd to the 24th of June. Saint Peter in Sintra. We're going to learn about all this cities you're not familiar with, Sintra and stuff, later, and which is a town on the outskirts of Lisbon, 28th through the 29th of June. And like, for example, where the Sintra parade is fairly low key, you can expect to see a very lively parade in Lisbon. And especially, this is a big deal in Portugal, and it's a big deal in this festival, is street vendors serving barbecued sardines, um, representing Saint Anthony feeding the poor. This is a big tradition, and we'll talk about the food later. But the sardines is barbecued or grilled. It's a huge thing in Portugal. Um, so Porto, for example, does it a little bit different and throws street parties with late night concerts, regatta, and fireworks. And you might also see locals jumping over bonfires. Another festival is the Festa dos Tabuleiros. And I'm going to explain to you what this is. So you see, they cover the streets and they put like all this paper flowers hanging and creating this sort of archway. And happens during the first 2 weeks of July. And you'll see in the picture the girls parade around the streets of Tomar. So this happens only in one town. It's right here. It's about an hour and 20 minutes from Lisbon. It's the town of Tomar with piles of bread on their heads. So all this you can see, in between the columns of flowers, there's columns of bread. So this is part of this festival of the trays. That's what tabuleiros means. It's also known as the Festa do Espírito Santo, which is Feast of the Holy Spirit. And it is Tomar's biggest and most spectacular procession. However, it only takes place every 4 years. So the next one is in 2023. People, excuse me, people walk in pairs with the girls wearing the tabuleiros, the trays, and their headdresses made from bread stacked up in rows, festooned with flowers and topped with a crown and a dove representing the Holy Spirit in a celestial sphere. So there are traditional processions alongside the main parade. Here is yet another festival. As you can see, they've got so many unique festivals in Portugal. This is the Cavalgadas de São Pedro. This happens in the Azores, and it's one of the most curious festivals that you will see and find in the Azores. It's a secular tradition that takes place annually on June 29th in São Miguel Island, which is the largest island of the Azores. So, mounted on horses, adorned with bands and hats, and with paper flowers, with a spear in hand, the king, which is this gentleman in the not Portugal doesn't have a king, but the this guy represented the king. He's accompanied by two lancers. They open the procession, and they're followed by hundreds of knights on horse. So then they go to the Church of Sao Pedro, and then they do the king and the lancers do a proclamation there as being, ambassadors of the Apostle Peter. And then they go around the church in a few laps, 7 laps to be precise, to be associated with the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit. The procession goes to the main street of Ribeira Grande and to the town hall, where the king speaks in front of the city hall, and then the knights do another 3 laps around the garden. So, alluding to the figure of the Trinity. So, there's a lot of meaning into everything that is done in this festival. And it's obviously, very, very interesting to see. Moving on, so that was in the Azores. Now we're going to go to Madeira. Madeira has two really great festivals. So, Madeira, the other islands of Portugal, also known for the delicious 45 wine that the island of Madeira produces. So you can visit during the week-long festival in late summer to celebrate the grape harvest, and it's a great opportunity to experience both the island and the wine. There's a traditional pressing of the grape with your feet, which you can participate in. There's parades and folk music, wine tastings, of course, craft fairs. Um, the bars and restaurants will host their own events. And then, of course, this is a float. What you see in this picture is actually a float going through the parade. And again, you see and recognize here the love that the Portuguese have for costumes and getting all dressed up. So the Madeira One Festival is one of the island's main tourist attractions, and it pays tribute to this wonderful wine that they create and to its significance to their economics and finances of the island. So it's late August, early September, and it tries to recreate the old traditions, as you see in the float of Madeira, which develop over centuries of working um, this wine. And this one I find it to be really, really cool is the Madeira Flower Festival. The other thing that, it's Madeira is very famous for is its foliage, it's the flora, it's all the flowers, no? So Madeira's beautiful blooms are sold all around the world. And if you visit in spring, you would understand why. This beautiful festival celebrates the variety of tropical flowers that grow across the island and is as fragrant as it is colorful. The Plaza del Municipio, which is the central square, has a spectacular flower mural. They do flower carpets on that decorate the streets. And of course, you guessed right, there is a parade and people are in costume. Um, so this takes place in April or May, 4 weeks exactly after Easter, when the flowers are in bloom. Um, Also known as the island of flowers or the floating, garden, Madeira has the perfect climate for blossoms to thrive. They're living in like, eternal spring, and the flowers grow everywhere. Uh, the so the flower festival is a tribute to spring and to the flower. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit. So those were the main festivals that I wanted to share with you guys. But I also want you to learn about something else. This is the Portuguese folklore sound, and we have a sound clip for you to hear. It's called fado. It's their traditional music and singing. So experiencing fado is a very soul-filled musical style, as you'll hear in a second. Fado is a melancholic, it's got mourning voices, they express longing. It's accompanied by an acoustic guitar and a Portuguese guitar, and it's a national symbol of Portugal. This you can experience a Fado performance anywhere in Portugal. And it's actually, this is how important it is. It's included in UNESCO's list of world's intangible cultural heritage. It's a really big deal. It's a musical genre that can be traced back to the 1820s in Lisbon, but probably has much earlier origins. In popular belief, fado is a form of music that it's characterized by mournful tunes and lyrics, often about the sea or the life of the poor, and it's infused with sort of a sentiment of resignation, of fate, melancholia, and it's often has one or two, 12-string guitars, like we mentioned, and one or two violas. So, and fado means fate. So I'm going to play a clip for you guys, just a short clip. So I think it's 30 seconds.
Sou do fado, como sei, vivo um poema cantado, de um fado que eu inventei, a falar. Não posso dar-me, mas ponho a alma a cantar, e as almas sabem escutar-me. Chorei, chorei, poetas do meu país, troncos da mesma raiz, da vida que nos juntou. E se você...
Alrighty, so there's a sound bit of what fado is like, and now we're going to move on to food, and I hope to make you very hungry. I think food is it's also a great way to understand the culture and what's important to them, and how they've sort of organized their society and family life and friends life. So we're going to talk a lot about bacalhau or codfish. Um, and you have a picture here of a recipe called bacalhau do Porto. So the Portuguese, they love the cod. The Portuguese say there are 365 different ways to prepare cod. So you can find lots of different recipes, and they all use bacalhau, which is a salted cod. It's been an integral part of the Portuguese diet for centuries and for a good reason. And interestingly enough, it's not native to their water. So most of the cod comes from Scandinavia. But still, it's become the staple, most important food in Portugal. So salting the, oh, something happened to my computer. Sorry. All right, here we go. Um, I was saying salting cod not only adds flavor, but also removes the need for refrigeration. Despite the prevalence of refrigeration in modern times, bacalhau has not lost its popularity in Portuguese culture. So the dish that you see above is a mishmash of shredded salted cod with potatoes, eggs, onions, and olives. Now here we have a different recipe for cod. This is bacalhau con natas, which would be a cream sort of casserole for with the cod. Here we have the Porto rolls, which is actually a pretty typical activity to do, learn how to do that when you're around in Porto. So these are more than a snack and less than a meal. They're fried cakes made with cod and potatoes instead of sugar and flour. Then we have the sardines. We've already talked about their importance. The sardinhas assadas is called in Portuguese. It's the summertime food of choice in Portugal. So in June, as we talked about the festivals, the smell of the grilled sardines is you can smell it throughout the city, especially in Lisbon, and especially if you land on St. Anthony's Day. And from then in June, the Festas de Sardinia, which is the festival of the sardines, sort of kicks off. So it's more of a season. This is our favorite dish for the summer. They're eaten directly from a charcoal grill, and they're marinated with Portuguese olive oil and served with salads, rice, or potatoes. I grew up eating these every summer. Now here's something a little different. Is the polvo lagadeiro, and is a famous octopus dish that you can find across the country. It's a lagareiro is a popular way of cooking seafood, which includes using very generous amounts of Portuguese olive oil, as you can see on the plate. And traditionally in Portugal, octopus is served with boiled potatoes, and then they're baked. The octopus and the potatoes are baked and roasted. One of the most famous cheeses in Portugal is the Arabida cheese that you can see here. This is from a region that is just southwest of Lisbon. And as you can see, it's a cheese that you cut off the top of the crust of the cheese, and then you just spoon it out onto some bread. So if you like a different kind of creamy but with a strong flavor of cheese, this is great. And last with dessert, we're going to end with dessert with our foods, is the pastel de nata or pastéis de nata, is the iconic and famous Portuguese dessert. Every pasteleria or pastry shop has their own version of the pastel de nata. Um, it's a sweet and creamy Portuguese egg tart, and it's made with flour, butter, eggs, cinnamon, and lots of sugar, and lots of butter that are layered into the dough, which gives the shells a crispy and crackling texture. They're said to be originated in Belém, a district of a neighborhood of Lisbon, in a certain pastry shop in 1837. So they have a long tradition. All right, we're going to do the wines, and we're going to have a different map to look at to see, because a lot of the times we think of Madeira, we think of port wine, and we know the Douro might have a red or so, but Portuguese wine has quite a variety. So of course we would start with the Douro region, which is one of the wildest and most rugged regions in Portugal. The hills along the Douro River have been worked by hand into stair steps since ancient times. It's so impressive that the entire region is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And here you find port, which is a sweet fortified wine from a different variety of aromatic grapes. I'm not an enologist, so I will do my best to describe the different wines, but port is not all that you can find in the Douro. And it's one of the richest regions in terms of indigenous grape varieties. So it's got hundreds of unique varieties and an extensive area of old vines. So sometimes planted with dozen different varieties all mixed together. So the dry Douro wines can be red, white, and rosé, and they use like we talked about, a variety of grapes. Then there's Minho. Minho, if you see here in the map, would be right across, going straight across west from the Douro River. This here is where we find Vinho Verde or green wine, which is not, really, it's a light-bodied white wine, and it's not green. But it has a little bit of a spritz, effervescence, and a sort of a fruity taste, lemonade-like flavors with notes of melon, gooseberry, and a chalky texture. So this is typical from here. Now in the Alentejo, which is down south of Lisbon, southeast towards Spain. So here, if you like a Malbec or a Cabernet Sauvignon, this is what the kind of wines that you're gonna find in the Alentejo. It's a massive region, so it's which is known for all its miles and miles of cork trees, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But here, there's also many progressive and modern wineries making red wines that offer generous fruit and maca flavors and with different wood aging strategies. So they're good for you if you like medium body to full body sort of wines, both reds and whites. Then our last region that there are more regions, but for today we're gonna look at Dao. So the wines from the Dao are lighter in style than the ones in the Douro, but they've shown to age very well because of the tannin and acidity development from growing in high altitude area with rugged soils and on granite soils. So the Dao area is surrounded by mountains in all directions. So it's it like sort of creates a microclimate. It protects the vineyards that are scattered among pine forest and the like. Sorry, I'm missing a couple of wine regions, which is that I'm still going to talk about Lisbon and Madeira, and then we'll move on to the cities. So the region of Lisbon, so it'll be this strip that is going from the sort of the tip of the nose up in the dark orange here. It's one of the most dynamic and varied regions, and they have many wines from here. They're actually making their newer wines. There's less tradition here, but they're definitely worth noting. The reds are often blends, and they'll remind you of a Cabernet Sauvignon with hints of blackberry, clove, and cedar. And last, this is truly last this time, Madeira wine is a fortified wine with an almost unlimited storage capacity, managing to survive for more than 2 centuries. They actually say that if you open a bottle of Madeira, because it's so fortified, it will actually won't spoil for like a year. So there's a reason for that, and it's how it was, the wine gets made. So Madeira makers go through a process of heating up or cooking the wine on purpose. It all comes back to their history. So Madeira wines travel on long sea voyages, and their storage in those hot boats transform the wines, add in delicious nutty and dry fruit flavors through the exposure to the warmth and the oxygen. And today, the winemakers, even though they don't send their barrels in to sea in ships, they use the same technique for the same purpose. All right, so we're going to talk about the cities, which you've been waiting for. We are going to start with Lisbon. Um, I love Lisbon. I think that walking the streets of Lisbon, you feel transported to another time. It is, you see this trolley car with this architecture and the colorful buildings, and it's such a contrast, almost like time stopped when you get to Lisbon. It is a bustling city and is one of the most fascinating cities in all of Europe, with a mixture of tradition, rich history, and modernism, and it's full of life with lots to do. One of the things that is really interesting about Portuguese architecture is their love for coloring the outside, sorry, not coloring, for using tiles on the outside of their buildings. The predominantly color is blue, like you see here, but they each have different intricate designs. And a lot of these tiles are still hand painted today. Fun thing to do in Lisbon is to do a tile painting workshop where you take your tile home with you, for example. Another great thing about Lisbon is that parts of it are really open, like the riverfront is not far from downtown. This is the Belém district, where from when the Portuguese navigators left, looking for the New World, or looking for, to go to the New World. So, and in the end, you see the Belém Tower. This is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So this is originally where all the shipyards were, and from where all the voyages in the 15th century departed from. So because the Portuguese had a big seafaring history and tradition, having discovered new routes to India, East Africa, and Brazil. And the District of Belém actually has lots of extravagant buildings because of all the wealth that came and moved through this port. An example of that is the Geronimo's Monastery, that was built in construction began in 1501 and was completed 100 years later. And the King Manuel, he originally funded the project with money obtained from the Vintena da Pimenta, which was a 5% tax on all commerce that came from Africa and the Orient, which was equivalent to about 150 pounds of gold per year, with the exception of the opulence in the Belém district. Another district that is that it's a I was talking about St. George Castle, and it occupies this hilltop, and it's oversees the Tagus River, and so it's from medieval times, and the part of that medieval times of Portuguese history, and is one of the main tourist sites of Lisbon. Um, And according to a famous legend, the knight Martin Moniz in 1147, during the reconquest of the city from the Moors, he noted that one of the doors of the castle, which was occupied by the Moors, was open, and then he like sort of jammed his body in there and prevented the door from closing, sacrificing his life but allowing the Christians to enter and take the castle. Then another district in Lisbon is the Baixa district, where you are going to find tile cover houses, this wrought iron balconies, and this charming elevator that was built, I believe, by a disciple of the gentleman that did the Eiffel Tower. So it's wrought iron, and it's called the Santa Justa elevator, and it's a Gothic Rhode Island. It's 148 feet, so you get on the bottom and it goes up, and it is a lookout for visitors to enjoy, all the views of Lisbon and the neighborhoods. So Now, there are places, this is a place, for example, Almorol, which is a castle. Now, you're going to see the Portugal has lots of castles. There have plenty of them, and it has rich history of the with the Knights Templar. So this is a Knights Templar castle that it's actually in a little island in the Tagus River, which is the same river that goes to Lisbon. This is not a very touristy site, so this is something that you can really enjoy away from crowds. And you actually have to get on a little boat to get to the castle. And then there's a bunch of little islands on the river here, and like one has got the castle, another one's got wild horses. So it's really neat, not touristy area. Yeah, I mentioned we were going to talk a little bit about the Alentejo. Remember, that was that big, large region that is southeast of Lisbon, and it's like a beautiful scenery with gliding plains, sun and mountains, cork, and it's got the largest cork forest in the world. And actually, so this is the heartland of Portugal, touches Spain, and what what you might not know is that more than 50% of the cork consumed in the entire world is produced here in the Alentejo. The main town in the Alentejo is Évora, and it's a small village, but it's got a lot to see. Very compact historical center, another UNESCO site, and it's got this ancient Roman ruins, which is the Temple of Diana from the first century AD. And then it's got a chapel made entirely of bones. I could bring myself to put a picture of that. It was a little um, creepy, but they do have that, and then they have a statue of a pregnant Virgin Mary, and lots of cobblestone streets. We're talking about castles, here in this tiny little town, another one that is not very um, typical for tourists. This is more for locals. In it seems like in some parts of Portugal, there's a castle on every hill. So this is one of them. It's Marvao, and it's on a granite, escarpment with the sweeping views across the vast plains of the Alentejo. And you can find this walled village of Marvao, which is a 13th century um, walls that are practically intact, and you can access the village through a narrow medieval archway. So the whole village was founded in the 9th century AD, and it's like picture perfect. Another town around Lisbon that it's actually more, um, this is more known, this is more typical of a travel itinerary. It's Obidos. And Obidos is neat, the history of it. It was a gift from King Denis of Portugal in the 13th century to his bride. So his bride had said that she liked the look of the town, so she gave her that for her wedding present. I I feel like I didn't do well for my wife. Well enough. Um, so here you have cobblestone streets, whitewashed buildings with bright trim. As you can see here, the blues and stuff, and of course a medieval castle. Another interesting town. This is more if like you want to get out of, even though this is on a typical itinerary to Cascais, but if you want to get out of the hustle and bustle of Lisbon, it's a great place to stay. It used to be the premier destination for the Portuguese nobility, and it has a great illustrious heritage, and you can see, throughout the whole town. But I'm going to move on to Sintra because Sintra is one of my absolute favorite in all of Portugal. Sintra is a hidden town in the hills of Sierra do Sintra, and it's surrounded by pine-covered hills. It's a fairy tale town. It really is filled with whimsical palaces, extravagant buildings, and a great castle that we're going to see now. What you're looking at in this picture is the initiation well, which is really not a water sourcing well, but rather it's part of the Knights Templar or was ritual for new members. So it's kind of like a tower that goes underground instead of going up. And there was a whole ritual that the Knights Templars had that they had to go through all the different phases and stages to become an initiate. Here's the castle of Pena, National Palace of Pena, and it's some of the best 19th century expression of romanticism. It's got a mixture of many different architectural styles, and is, as was saying, very colorful and very whimsical. So Sintra is also a great place where you can stay and still be close to Lisbon, but not be in the big city. And there's plenty of really wonderful hotels there, and be in this sort of fairy tale town. And it's got a whole, surrounded by, the water on the one side and the forest on the other, and you can go hiking. You can see here, it's great. Tomar is another ancient town and also one with medieval Templar Knights history. If you like that, so here you can see another Knights Templar castle in Tomar. And then Nazareth is interesting because so before, if you know, there's a pilgrimage site, Catholic pilgrimage site in Portugal, very famous, which is Fatima. But Nazareth was actually the pilgrimage site before that originally, but today has become a one of the more biggest surfing towns in the world because they have huge waves up to 80 feet tall. So surfers from all over the world come to Nazareth, and this is if you're a surfer, it's well known, but if you just touring around, then it's definitely not a touristy place in that sense. Another non-touristy place that it's definitely a must-see that not many people know about, it's the Busako Forest. This is not an actual natural forest, but it's a walled in arboretum planted by the Carmelite monks in the 17th century. It's got exotic trees that were brought in from all the corners of the world. And then King Carlos the First built a 19th century palace here that is actually today a hotel. It's called the Palace Hotel, and I'm going to show you a picture of it because it's really really neat and exceptional. And again, this is it's in between Lisbon and Porto. You're about 2.5 hours north of Lisbon, just after Coimbra. Coimbra is a sort of the university city in Portugal, but it was also the medieval capital of Portugal for over 100 years. So it's also a riverfront city, definitely worth visiting as well. I'm going to move on to Porto, which is also one of my favorite stops in Portugal because of all the beautiful, colorful buildings and contrast. And I love Porto. So Porto is bridges and monuments, it's tiles decorated in houses, flower and balconies and shopping streets. The historic center of Porto and the River Douro on the Gaia side, so across where all the port wine lodges are located. The whole area, the whole two neighborhoods are World Heritage Sites by UNESCO. Here's another example of some tiles on a wall on the outside of a building with a very intricate design. A really cool stop in Porto is the Libreria Lelo. So this is believed to have served as inspiration for J.K. Rowling when she was writing Harry Potter. It is also actually one of the world's oldest bookstores, and it's ranked frequently as one of the most beautiful bookstores in the world and a top place to visit Portugal. It actually opened in 1906. Portuguese, as you've seen in some of the pictures, love towers as well. So here you have the Clérigos Tower or the Clerics Tower, which is a genuine Baroque masterpiece dating from the mid 18th century. And it's actually constructed in granite. And, protruding out, you have it goes from, block to block, and then it culminates in the spherical clock house at the top. Another place you might not think of stopping by, but it's a really good place to stop by, is this train station, the São Bento. It's a French Beaux Arts structure that holds within 20,000 magnificent azulejos or tiles depicting Portugal's past, its royalty, its wars, its transportation history. It was built in the 1900s, and it's named after a Benedictine monastery that once occupied this space in the 16th century. The Old Town Porto it's this medieval old city. It's the Porto Riviera. It's the historic district that begins along the banks of the River Douro and spreads into the hills. It has lots of shops and restaurants that are even built into the old city wall. It's all worn of narrow, crooked alleyways. um, it is really cool to see and the best thing you can do there is to just get lost in the streets and, find a coffee shop that, the locals use and just get a feel for the, Portuguese culture right there. And this actual neighborhood history goes back thousands of years to when the Phoenicians merchants would moor on the river and trade with the Lusitanians of the time. Now, another really good place to stop at is Cafe Majestic. And this was established in 1921, and it was a favorite meeting place for artists and writers. It's a true marvel of Belle Epoque architecture, and it's great. It's a must stop to just go in there, have a cup of coffee, and it's very, very beautiful. Now, we talked about the wine lodges on the Villanova de Gaia, so across the river from the city. This is so the lodges are what we would call, wineries, and so you can visit them and have some wine tastings. So the grapes are harvested and vinified, fortified in the Douro states called quintas, and then they get sent to the lodges to be aged and stored before they get shipped to different markets around the world. Another really cool stop. Now we're going to see sort of day trips from Porto. So it's Aveiro. I really like Aveiro. It's on the north coast of Portugal, south of Porto. And the city, it's actually on the shore of a saltwater lagoon. So it's a maritime city with, water in its soul. It's crisscrossed by canals that you can navigate on this painted boats, which are called barcos moliceiros. It's called the Venice of Portugal, as you can imagine, and also is typical or known for its Art Nouveau houses in the old part of the city. Of course, if you're in Porto, you want to stop and spend some time in the Douro Valley, which is a fully navigable river where you can experience sailing along the steep hills covered in vineyards and breathtaking views. And, if you're not on a multi-day cruise ship, there's plenty of ways for you to you can do a day cruise. On a private ship or on other ones, a shared one, a group one, and you can even stop at some of the states and have lunch there. It's very accessible. Or you can get on a bike and go riding through vineyards, which is a very popular thing to do, fun thing to do. I'm going to move to the Algarve. So the Algarve was in the south. It's known for its beautiful coves and its picturesque beaches and fun villages. It's a great destination for water sports, like kayaking around the coves and rock formations. It's one of the most typical. You can go sailing, also golf, lots of great golf courses, and much more. Many things to do. It's got a great nightlife as well. So here you see what I mean by the kayaks. This is one of the, very typical things to do here. You could just, the waters are calm, but you can go around all these coves and through all this archways, and it's really cool. All right, the Azores. We the Azores are in the Atlantic. They're right straight, if you can see here in the map, right straight in front of the mainland, Portugal. You can actually fly direct to the Azores from several places in the US. United is coming up with a new flight next year, starting in May, I believe, from Newark to the Azores, and then there's a Portuguese airline that does other direct flights. And it's if you love nature, um, if it's a nature lover's paradise. So it's got 9 islands that are got dramatic landscape, fishing villages, green pastures, tons of flowers. The biggest island is São Miguel, and then the other typical islands are Terceira, so Jorge and Pico. And then you fly direct to São Miguel, or if you're in Lisbon, you can also obviously fly here. But let me show you some pictures because it's absolutely stunning. So, being a volcanic origin, it has plenty of hiking trails for novices and experts alike. Here you see the hike to the Sete Cidades, where you can see several volcanic lakes in around this hiking path in the picture. And here we can see the green and blue lakes, which, according to legend, were formed from the tears of a shepherd and a princess who shared a forbidden love. The island of San Miguel. Here's another, hiking trail that you can see. It's all paved. It's easy to follow. There are lots of um, waterfalls, lagoons. The blues, the greens are just out of this world. Just the vegetation is just so lush and colorful. Here's this small village of Pedreira in the island of São Miguel. And as you can see, typical of Portuguese, all this really colorful houses, contrast with the lush vegetation. It's definitely, if you love nature, this is a beautiful choice. And lastly, we're going to talk about Madeira and then open up to some questions. Um, so Madeira is in the Atlantic. It's right on top of the Canary Islands, so right west of Morocco in Africa. And it's mainly, I mean, it's 3 islands, but it's mainly you visit Madeira, sometimes Porto Santo as well, and it's another natural, nature haven for to see exotic colors and flowers. Like we saw that festival of flowers. Yeah, but when I talk about that, it's a nature's paradise. Don't think that it's uninhabited or like sparsely inhabited. Is These are islands that are full of life, as you've seen in those festivals, whether the horses in the Azores or the wine or the flower festival in Madeira. It's both the Azores and Madeira have a temperature that is like permanent spring. And I believe, can't remember the airline right now, but there are some direct flights from JFK to Funchal. This is in Madeira. It's the village of Santana. It's one of my favorite. It's on the north side of the island and it's home to 100 thatch roof homes. And this is where the small rural homes inhabited by farmers during the settlement of the island. So they're surrounded by waterfalls, cobblestone streets, of course, flowers, ravines, and it's really neat. And here again, I love showing the contrast between the buildings and the lush vegetation. And this is another small village in the main island. And I wanted to show you a picture of the waters because the waters are incredible, just turquoise. The temperature of the water is warm as well, just like the temperature of the island and the air is as well. But I love the contrast between the lush vegetation, the fishing boats, the colors and the buildings, and this water. So I've tried to speed up a little bit towards the end so that we could have time for questions because they spent a lot of time in the beginning on the festivals. So I wanted to make sure that we cover the whole deck and presentation. So I hope that you've enjoyed imagining yourself through the busy streets of Porto or traveling into the whimsical fairy tale land of Sintra or enjoyed cod prepared, maybe not 365 ways, but maybe five or six. And the exploring the beauty of nature in either Madeira or the Azores.